pleased to be gathered with you today on an important topic affecting higher education and society more generally. My name is Clark Gilbert. I'm the president of BYU-Pathway Worldwide, a 50,000 student organization focused almost exclusively on access. Today on our panel, I'll be joined by Beverly Tatum, well-known author and former president of Spellman College, as well as Michael Crow, president of ASU, and Arne Duncan, the managing partner of Emerson Collective and former Secretary of Education. Our goal today is not to talk about the details of the current admission scandal and news coming out today. That will be settled in the courts and in the media. But we'd like to talk a little bit more generally about how this scandal is affecting the dialogue around access and equity, around opportunities in the U.S. higher education system more generally. I'd like to ask each of our panelists if they'd start out by maybe framing some of the issues that they see coming out of this and maybe use it as an opening statement to start our panel. And Beverly, could you start us and we'll just go down and then Michael and Arne.
I'll be happy to. I want to start by telling an anecdote, a brief anecdote. I spend a lot of my time speaking on college campuses, and I was on a campus in Minnesota this week, early last week, and I was talking to an African-American student who said, what should I say when people tell me that I'm just here because I'm black, that I'm a product of affirmative action? And what I said to him was that you don't have to explain why you're here. You just need to be successful while you're here. Right. You've been admitted because someone thought you could do the work here, and you don't have to explain yourself. But what's important about that question is that this scandal has exposed what I'm going to call affirmative action for white people, and that that white student who is asking that student of color, or saying to that student of color, you wouldn't be here except for that, is never in the position of having to question, how did I get here? Who am I, and what space do I take up? Yeah. And I think that this scandal exposes that system of affirmative action that's been in place for decades. Almost a shadow system for people of privilege that never gets talked about. Never named, yeah. For sure. Great. Michael?
It's a really weird thing to see that we have decided to replicate the people that we threw off at the time of the revolution, the British. And so it's just unbelievable to me that we live in a country where we fought this revolution to make certain that your family circumstance was never going to be the means by which you gained power, that it was going to be a meritocracy, imperfect at the beginning, but moving towards higher levels of perfection or higher levels of achievement along the way. So here we find ourselves in the last few months, last couple of years. The Economist ran a cover of the magazine with people wearing 18th century fancy clothing of wealthy families with bags with Yale and Harvard and Columbia and Stanford stickers on their bags from the 18th century, talking about the new aristocracy of the United States. And then later, a more recent cover of the Atlantic with a beautiful baby on the cover, again, talking about using words like aristocracy. Using words like and so now we have families that are out there that think that they can buy their way into the aristocracy by having their child placed, not finish, placed in a particular school. And so it's just weird to me. So one of the things at ASU that we are literally, certainly me personally, but the institution, at least by the time I'm done there, will be obsessed with is egalitarian access. So we don't have any affirmative action, none. If you meet our admission standards, you are admitted, period. If you don't have money, you get resources to attend. And so, unfortunately, we live in a society that when we take a view like that, and this is an aggravating thing for us. In fact, some of you may even note that one of the families said that they needed to bribe the University of Southern California so their kid wouldn't have to go to ASU. And so...
I did read that.
Now, we learned later that his wife's former husband was a graduate of ASU and was also a very successful billionaire. So he said, well, maybe that's what it came from. But the point is that we have this unbelievable social distortion going on. Private colleges and private universities, they have they are who they are. They can do what they want. They should have a diverse class and so forth and so on. They've only got so many seats. They've got to constrain those things. They've got a particular mission that they're on. But public universities have also entered into this fray where they've decided that now that the path to success is exclusion. I am a great public university because I only admit 10% of the people that apply, and therefore you should feel that this is a better school because your kid gets to go to that. That is absurd. It's actually antithetical to the core reason that the democracy has the framework that it has. So I'm not tooting our horn other than to say that we decided to take the admission standards of the University of California from the summer of 1950. Do you have a B average? Did you take the 15 courses that prepare you for college? If you did those two things, you are admitted. The cost of tuition at that time was zero. Zero. That's a public university. There's a public university for you. Yeah. and so you're qualified to go to the university. And so that's the institute. And so what we have now is we have this distortion. It's almost, I came to ASU from Columbia University, and it's just so weird to me that people would, I asked my daughter, my youngest daughter who's in college, well, what's your reaction to all this? And she said, I can't believe what those kids must feel like, that their parents have no faith in them. And so just think of the whole cycle. We've gotten so distorted. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fantastic colleges in the United States. They're everywhere, in every neighborhood, every corner, everywhere. And we have decided to reproduce the aristocracy that we blew up. And we need to stop that.
First of all, I got two extraordinary college presidents here. I've been fortunate to visit both their campuses and see their work, and they walk the walk. So I'm really, really proud to be able to have a conversation with you guys. Secondly, I thought I had seen every scandal and had seen every challenge.
You were surprised when you heard this news?
I was stunned. And I knew about college athlete issues and all kinds of, I'm in the weeds and all that, and co-chair of the night commission, and that's a sort of separate but related conversation. But I had no clue on this, like just totally caught off guard. It actually took me a minute to really understand what was going on. And yeah, it's a punch in the gut. It's a punch in the gut. And what I think it does is it confirms for a lot of people who feel the deck is stacked against them that they're right, that they're right. And so that's a really, really tough one. I will say the larger issue, I mean, we can condemn this, and again, the idea that kids who are born on third base, parents didn't have to steal home for them, that's a little crazy. And Michael's point that there are hundreds of great campuses, that's true. For me, the larger issue, and this broadens out a little bit, not just higher ed, but K-12, that the dream of education in America is that no matter where you're born, or your race, or your zip code, or your neighborhood, that you have a chance to get a great education. The truth is there is privilege in every part of our education continuum, starting in kindergarten. And most folks in this room, including myself, buy homes in places where there are good schools, where there's a larger tax base. It is unfair. And so this is maybe an acute manifestation of that privilege at the end of it, but the unfairness of the system starts with our 3- and 4-year-olds. And if we're going to tackle something, I'd rather tackle the whole thing and not just tackle the issue at the top of the few.
Absolutely.
So, Arne, one of the things you point out is that it reveals something we've all kind of known, and even though bribery and illegality of this is upsetting, I think both Beverly and you are both saying it's also opening up a view that there's a lot of inequity here that's often not talked about, not focused on. And there was a great piece in the Chronicle last week that looked at preferential access, and athletics was part of that. But one of the biggest sources of preferential access was legacy parents.
That's a form of action for white people.
That's exactly.
And I think the data says it was 20%, everything else equal, higher odds of getting in.
Yeah.
Being a first-generation college student was only 4%, and coming from the lowest income categories had no effect. Right. I wonder if I can ask the panel to talk about, given the presence of maybe hidden advantages, what does that mean for our discussion around access and privilege and selection criteria? I mean, maybe every school, Michael, has open access, but some won't, and some will have a selection criteria. what role does that play in today's society, given some of the benefits are transparent and some are not?
I think a couple things. For me, those aren't hidden privileges. Legacy admissions has been well known forever. Like, that's not a hidden, this particular instance, that was a hidden privilege.
Yeah.
But the legacy's been there for, whatever, 100, 150 years. I think the question is really of what are universities' values? What Michael talks about is a focus on inclusion being the badge of honor, not exclusion.
Yeah.
And it's just, what do we stand for? But as long as we stand for our prestige, our status, on keeping people out, not opening the door to them, then it's going to lead to this perversion.
I grew up, I moved over 20 times before I went to my freshman dorm room, almost 25 times. I went to 17 schools that we stayed at longer than 2 weeks. I went to 4 high schools in the 10th grade alone in 3 different states. And so what that taught me going through all of that in the kind of family that I was raised in, which was struggling on a lot of different fronts, was every school I would go to, they would ask me, and I literally would think this as a 10-year-old, these stupid teachers would ask me these stupid questions. What was your grade point? What was this? They didn't ever want to know what I knew. They only wanted to know, well, did you take this test, and can you do this, and can you do that? And so I think along the way, what I realized was that we and then as an adult, decades later now, I'm sitting here saying to myself, we've got this archaic system in which we sort and separate people based on a couple areas of intelligence and a couple areas of strength. We've got a system that's so industrial that we use test scores to sort people out, and we do this and this test that you take on a Saturday morning when you're 16 years old. And there's somehow a revelation of who you're going to be. We need to change our thinking about education being some kind of linear process in which you're sort of done with it at 21 or 25 if you go to graduate school, or 18 if you go to high school. We need to start thinking about a person being a living, breathing, learning creature for the entirety of their life. And we need institutions that can fulfill these roles along the way for people, and realizing that life is a long time frame. And that we're literally, I said this even in a video I did recently, if you want to know what disparities are coming from and high school dropout rates and not completing college, 50% of the kids don't finish college, that's the design we have in place. We are designed to do that. This is just an outcome of that same design, this admission scandal. We are designed about as poorly as you can imagine for a large, highly diverse population of people moving into an environment where learning is an expectation over the entirety of your life. We've got some serious structural issues, design issues, the way that things work that we've got to take care of. And these are just all symptoms of the same thing. These people were not, I thought that you should actually bribe somebody to give you this degree that actually somehow pretends that you're smart. Rather than admit you to a school. I thought, what possibly could an admission do for you other than grant you some kind of status? And so we've got some pretty perverse incentives out there right now that we need to take some serious looks at.
One of the things that I think about is, you have the perspective, obviously, as coming from a large state institution. My entire education career has been in small, private, liberal arts colleges. And certainly, if you're thinking about a small private liberal arts college, you are thinking about how you put together your class. You're not putting together thousands of people, you're putting together several hundred, right? You think about that. But in thinking about that, you're trying to create a learning environment in which everyone can thrive, and you're trying to create an environment that is representative of not just the populations you serve. Spellman is an HBCU for women. Obviously, there's a particular population that we serve. But before that, I was at Mount Holyoke College. I attended Wesleyan University, et cetera. And when we think about those places, the question is, how do we identify talent? And even when you say, if you've got a B average and have taken certain courses, you're admitted. Yeah. But there's some places where those certain courses aren't even available.
Sure.
And so in that context, how do we identify the talent we need without leaving people out who are capable of doing the work, but haven't, because they're not in the right neighborhood, had access to the opportunities?
We're all over that. So we'll take 11,000 transfer students from community colleges this year just for our on-campus programs, and thousands more for our online programs. And then we just built and deployed, you don't know about this yet, but a new program called Pathways, where for whatever reason, when you were 17, you didn't get anything done right. whatever, you lived in a car, your parents, didn't give you any way to even go to school, who knows? You just got a juvenile detention. So if you got a juvenile detention now in the United States, the probability that you will graduate from high school is something like 5%. And so it's unbelievable that you're ruined for the rest of your life because you screwed up when you were 15 years old. So we have a thing called Pathways, where you earn your way into college by taking courses in which you're relentlessly tutored on taking the courses, and then you earn your way in. So we are working on those fronts. Each college, a small college like Spellman or others that are out there, I used to be a trustee of Bowdoin College. Each of those colleges, what they need is they should have a unique environment in which that's what they teach from their historical legacy of their founders. And then they should have a student body that's representative of the country in that. The public universities, that's another matter. They need to figure out how to scale and adjust and move forward in different ways and do new kinds of things. And they need to figure out how to start graduating people, because they don't know how to do that.
Right. Well, the small ones do.
Yes.
But in that context, yes.
Some of the small ones.
You're right.
You'll see in a chart that I'll show tomorrow that the highest underperformers are a series of a couple hundred small public colleges that graduate no one.
Yeah.
Michael, one of the things I think you're suggesting is part of the solution is stop reinvesting in quote unquote elite limited access programs and invest in market mechanisms that provide access with positive outcomes like graduation and placement and other things. What should we be looking at, besides, just ASU, just general models that help answer some of these? And Michael points out the graduation rates. I don't know many industries where you don't even graduate half of the people who sign up for your program. And if you're in the first generation of a college student home, or if you're in the bottom income quartile, those completion rates drop below 15%. So we don't have a access problem, really. We have a completion problem in higher education. And so a lot of this is focused on access. But I think what Michael's hinting at is there's a much bigger issue around not just getting you to college, but getting you to complete.
Absolutely. I wanted to, as you're asking that question, I think, so I live in Atlanta, and one of the places that's gotten a lot of positive attention is Georgia State University, because they are closing the gap, closed the gap between who graduates and who doesn't, which is not to say everybody graduates. Everyone, of course, is still working on completion, but the gap, the racial gap, the first gen versus students coming out of college educated homes, that gap is closing. And a lot of that has to do with innovation around just-in-time advising, curricular pathways so that students are on track and don't inadvertently lose time because they've taken the wrong courses, can't get into the major they want, that kind of thing. So it is possible. So I lift that example up as a place that is working on, at scale, closing some of those gaps.
This one's actually, I think, a pretty easy one intellectually to figure out. We just lack the political will to do that. So federal financial aid drives all of this. All of that, billions and billions of dollars coming from all of us as taxpayers, all of that comes based, as you said exactly right, on access, on inputs. $0 go to outcomes, to graduation rates, for taking more Pell Grant recipients, for graduating more, for becoming a more inclusive university. And so our administration failed there. We tried. We got pushback both from Republicans and from Democrats, frankly. But we just want to move a small piece of federal funding behind those institutions where the numbers are getting better. And for me, it's always got to be not absolute numbers, but growth and gain. Where are graduation rates going up? Where are gaps closing? Where are you serving more Native Americans, more African Americans, more first gen, more students living below the poverty line? The fact that there are no financial incentives for good behavior is a huge problem.
Does that, though? Yes, please. Thank you. Arne, does that? There's a second order risk there, though, which is if you reward people for outcomes, does it make some institutions more adverse to the risk of admitting higher risk students?
Yes, but no. You mitigate that risk if you reward the right outcomes. Pell Grant recipients, Native American, first generation college goers. So if you're just rewarding graduation rate, then yes, you do it. But you're trying to get underserved, disadvantaged groups not just in the door, but walking across the stage at the back end.
Yeah.
So you can be very targeted, very specific what you're asking universities to do.
But a balanced set of metrics is probably pretty important instead of a monolithic.
Yeah.
And there are a set of places that have doubled and tripled Pell Grant recipients.
Yeah.
Again, that's fantastic. We highlight it. We don't reward them financially for doing that hard work.
So one of the things we have to figure out is how to, and you and I have talked about some of this, so we have to figure out how to stimulate innovation at a faster rate. So if you want a kid to get through college more quickly, or you want a kid to be able to get through college at all, it might be that they have to go to college in the summer because they have to work somewhere else in the fall, or they have to do this, they have to do that. So we changed our academic structure to 6 modules, fall A, fall B, spring A, spring B, summer B. The purpose was to create these 6 opportunities for students and faculty to engage in highly creative, less time-constrained learning environments. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't take a 15-week course. You could. The government won't allow the use of a Pell Grant in the summer. And so the kid who's trying to get through quickly, or who needs to do this or needs to do that, can't get the support that they need to go to college in the summer. It's just a minor thing in a sense, but not really. Not really. And so what we have is we have no pathway yet to figure out how to speed things up, how to lower cost, how to enhance outcomes, how to adjust to people. So as Eisenhower, I think, who went to West Point and then was in the military for his entire life, I think he visited Dartmouth University when he was president. And so you see this beautiful, and it's unbelievably beautiful place, and he says, this is what a college campus is supposed to look like. Well, what we have is we have public policies that are based on this is what a college is supposed to be. There is no this. There are hundreds of ways to advance. There are all kinds of ways to advance to learning outcomes. And so what we have is the government, the colleges, the universities, everybody, we're living in too structured and too rigid of a model about what college is. You show up here, a class is 3 hours with the professor for 3 credits. Really? We have ways that we're teaching now using adaptive learning technologies in which that whole model is of no consequence. It has no impact on any of that. We've got to start working on all these fronts at the same time.
One of the things, Michael, I admire at ASU is you don't just track completion, but you track it for different populations. And maybe, Arne, that's part of the answer is by population, particularly around first generation and bottom quartile income. The other thing seems to be an increasing need for transparency of data. I think one of the reasons many of these students, these families have pushed to get in these schools is there's a brand associated with them. And for good or for worse, they think that signals something. And while I think everyone's empathetic to let's provide greater access, that's scale accessible programs, there's still something in our culture that says I need to be in one of the best schools, and best defined in some of these strange ways, as you point out. Yeah. If you look at a lot of these students, they're looking for signal value. And even, at the Harvard Business School, where I spent the big part of the early part of my career, it's the most expensive business school in the world, but it still has the highest ROI. And so students are saying, if I get that brand, it's going to benefit me. And how do we make the value of education at other institutions more transparent so families and students aren't so obsessed with this quest for brand identity and brand labeling?
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer. I just totally agree with what they said is there are not dozens, there are hundreds of great options.
Yes.
And for me, what that guy was doing was he was selling fear.
Yeah.
And fear is a really powerful motivator that if you don't get in these 2 or 3 or 4 places, that somehow your life is ruined.
You mean the loser that ran this thing?
Yeah.
That then turned in his own people? That guy? Yeah.
But it was like, you have to do this. And the truth is...
His name is Rick.
But how do you feel about him, Mike?
It's just... it really is, for me, how you tell the story in a more clear, articulate way. But the story is crystal clear. My daughter's a junior now. We're going through this. And I'm like so relaxed because we know there are hundreds of great schools and she's going to be fine. And it takes so much pressure off of her and us as parents. But I think these other parents are told a lie and somehow they buy into that myth.
Can I say something about that? So this whole scandal reminded me a lot of a book I recently read, and I'm regretting I can't remember the author's name, but the title is Dream Hoarders.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe some of you have heard of it. But the author wrote the book and said, he's British. Yeah. And he said, I left England because it was so class bound. I wanted to come to America because, he believed that it was open opportunity. Work hard, whatever you achieve is yours because of your hard work and effort. It's a real meritocracy. What he wrote his book about was the fact that he discovered that the United States was in some ways more class focused in terms of hierarchies of status. As you were saying, we recreated the aristocracy than his native England was. And he talked about one of the reasons that is because of what he calls dream hoarding, that the people who have achieved a certain level of affluence, a certain level of status, want to preserve the things that have added to their level of status for their own children and don't want other people to have it. So of course we see an extreme of that in this admission scandal, but he talks about some of the everyday things that people do. For example, when parents mobilize because they don't want, when white parents mobilize because they don't want more kids of color to come to their local public school, that's an example of dream hoarding. Not to mention racism, but when,
oh, by the way,
when parents talk to their neighbors, their friends, and get internships for their children that give them on the fast track for employment opportunities. Of course, we all fall into this, I say we, if I know somebody, I'm going to call them up on behalf of my children, but that gives them an undue advantage that a child who doesn't have that relationship doesn't have access to. So, can we change our culture in that way? I don't know, but I think we need to be honest about the fact that it's not about a meritocracy. Yeah. It's about systems of advantage that are being recreated.
And so I want to say something on your return on investment thing. I've been running the calculations while I've been sitting here. So just because the Harvard Business School has a high return on investment doesn't mean it's a better school. Mm-hmm. It means that the people that graduate from that school get particularly financially meaningful returns from being a part of that network and so forth. And so the fact that that's a scarce good, which it is, there's nothing wrong with that in that kind of school. So our return on investments range in our university from 7% ROI for a person in our teacher's college to 23%, which is higher than the Harvard Business School's return for an engineering graduate. And so it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. What it means is that there are different markets for different skill sets for which people have to be thoughtful about where they're making investments. And so I want to be careful to make certain that people, I'm all for transparency, and we supported all the transparency stuff that you tried to do when you were secretary. We need to know ROI, we need to know return, we need to know what happens and so forth and so on and so on. We've got to get past this notion that that is better, that the best law school is the law school that produces the people with the highest salaries. It isn't the best law school. It's a law school that produces people with higher salaries. That doesn't mean better. And so it may mean that those are all bankruptcy lawyers who are really highly compensated.
That's what they do,
To build on that, these are really hard, complex issues.
Yes.
So for me, it's not just with the ROI, are you measuring social capital? Or are you measuring learning? Yeah. And we don't measure learning. Right. And again, that's a taboo subject in higher ed of how much you're actually learning. Is it the Harvard name that's being transferred, or is it the teaching better there? And the truth is, nobody really knows. It's hard to say.
It'd be good to know.
It'd be great to know, and that's the real ROI of how much are you learning. Yeah. But I want to come back to Bev's point, because I think that's the crux of the challenge of education in America, is we value highly education for our own, and we don't care about education for our neighbor. Mm-hmm. And until we start to worry about other people's kids and take their education seriously as ours, we're going to always have the privilege.
So what do you think is the reason for that? I have a couple of thoughts about that, but what do you think is the reason? I
think, well, I want to hear yours. I I think we see this as a scarce good, and we don't know the social benefit. The rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Because we have been taught that it is a scarce good, when in fact, how could it possibly be a scarce good? Right. We've also been taught that there's stupid people and not stupid people, which is also false.
Yeah. Yep.
Those are two falsehoods.
So for me, the two breakdowns in education in America is not caring about other people's kids, and that no politician is held accountable for educational gains, educational achievement, increasing opportunity. Mayors, governors, presidents, no one votes on education. And I could care less left or right, DRR, there are great ideas and bad ideas along the political spectrum. But if we voted for politicians and held them accountable for increasing high school graduation rates, increasing completion, regardless of political party, our country would be in a much, much better place. We don't do that.
You know, I love your point, Arne, on helping other people's kids, and I think it's Richard Reeves at the Brookings Institute who wrote Dream Hoarders, and one of the criticisms of his book is, well, so if you're a parent who went and got educated and know some of the tacit social capital of how to succeed, should you not teach your kids that? And of course, he doesn't think that, and. But I think one of the challenges is if you help your own children out, you help people you know out, but you don't think about society more generally. And I think one of his charges is, you know, every time you get an internship for your child, did you get 2 for people who would never have access to that opportunity? That does put a lot of hope on the goodwill of individuals. And I think some of the things you guys have all talked about today is at a systems level. And so maybe as we close out this panel, I think it's very clear the admissions scandal revealed some bad actors, but I think more fundamentally it's revealed lack of equity and access that all of us hope is improving, but when something like this comes out, it makes us realize how far we have to go. Maybe in our concluding minutes, each of you could just take some time to summarize what you think the most important actions we should have at both as educators, but also as a society to help improve opportunities for other students. And Beverly, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Michael and close with Arne.
Well, I'm going to come back to Arne's phrase, other people's children. I think we need to think about, well, let me put it in another context. So I was born in 1954. I don't mind saying that. In 1954,
1955.
Okay. In 1954 and 1955, the U.S. population was 90% white, 10% everybody else. If we look at the population under 21 today, we know that it's 52% white, about a quarter Latinx, about 14-15% Black, about 6% Asian, about 1 to 2% Native American. Hopefully that all added up to 100, but you get the picture. It's a rapidly changing.
Pluralistic.
It's a rapidly changing society. And, you know, I think it's important. I'm sitting up here, I write about race, as you know. And when we talk about these systems going back many decades, you know, hundreds of years, we might even say, that those hierarchical systems are largely based on racial stratification. And to the extent that we, as a society, don't focus on this rapidly growing population, denying access to opportunity, we're just sowing the seeds of a failed society. Because you can't have a healthy society where half the population is being disadvantaged systematically. So on the one hand, if you're just thinking, you know, think locally, think globally, act locally. If you're thinking about acting locally, you have to say, what are the education resources in my community? How are they being distributed? What can I do about it?
So I think what I would say is that it's time for us to actually move up another ratcheted level in terms of our sort of realization of the actual goals of the U.S. Constitution, which is a fantastic aspirational document. Even with its imperfections, certainly at its preamble, it's unbelievably aspirational. We need to understand that learning is a lifetime thing throughout a person's entire existence. We need to make it universal. We need to make it the same as water, the same as food.
We were not doing so well in the water department, I just want to say.
But we have water. There's lots of water. Some of it just has a lot of salt in it. And so, but the point is that what we've done is we've from day one, we've made it now a special thing. We've made it this thing where we have to narrow, we have to cut, we have to slash, we have to do this. I went to working class schools and graduated from a working class high school where there were no college counselors because nobody went to college. Everybody just went into the military or got a job down at some factory nearby or whatever. And so somehow we'd been pre-selected, just exactly as you were talking. Pre-selected? Are you like kidding me? Pre-selected? Think of the people that were left behind. Think of the dreamers and creators and innovators and great artists and other things that were left behind because we decided that our educational enterprise was itself going to be a social stratification system.
Exactly.
And so we have to find a way where if the kid doesn't want to go to college at 18, no problem. Here's a learning path for you. You go out, you get a job, you come back, you can go to college later. You can do this, you can do this, you can move back and forth, you can do all kinds of things throughout your whole life. So what we have is we've created this, as the country has grown and become more diverse, 330 million people almost, with 52% of the young people being of non-European origin. I mean, who would have ever imagined an unbelievably diverse place of this size and this scale? We have no educational institutions and no educational system yet ready for this. We've got to step back and say, how do we work with 400 million people, 450 million people doing the things that we're trying to do? And how do we make these things happen? And we haven't. So we need to take on this concept of universal learning and universal learner and stop worrying about the step-by-step process. I mean, in the country that we live in, you can drop out of high school at age 16 without your parents' permission. You don't need your parents' permission. You don't need a sign-off. You just stop going, all by yourself. I don't know how many of you, but when I was 16, I didn't even know anything. So who knows, why you make decisions at that age? And so it's just so weird. We have to find a way. If the kid drops out at age 16, they're not done learning. If you drop out of high school at age 16, with some exceptions, your life will be altered forever, for which there is a very, very, very difficult chance of getting back on track.
So obviously the scandal pointed out some outrageous things, and we're all probably appropriately outraged. But if we stop these 50 or 100 families from doing what they're doing, I still don't sleep well at night. I don't get any victory. There's no victory there. This is a symbolic issue. For me, where our real outrage should be is that if you come from the bottom quintile of income, you have about a 1 in 10 chance of ever graduating from college. We should be outraged that you talk income quartiles, top income quartile, lowest scoring, still has a higher chance, will graduate from college at a higher level than lowest income quartile, highest scoring.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally unfair.
You all heard that, right?
Say it again. highest income quartile, lowest scoring, that group graduates from college at a higher rate than lowest income quartile, highest scoring. The final stat, and it's hard to throw too many numbers out, but the good news
and the highest scoring kids in the lowest income quartile are the same as the highest scoring kids in the highest income quartile. They're the same ability.
Right.
Yeah.
Last number to throw out is that it's good news, bad news. This is where you got to look at data. The good news is over the past 20 years, the college completion rates for African Americans and Latinos have doubled. That's the good news. Mm-hmm. The bad news is that for African American, it doubled from 13 to 23%, from Latino to 8 to 15%. So the question is, we sit here, are we going to, 20 years from now, are we going to be, we're heroes because Latino is now at 30%, and African American is now at 46%, still not at half. And if that's unacceptable, then at scale, we got to think about how we get better much, much faster.
Can I say something about that? I really, I know you're trying to wrap, but so I'm sitting here, past president of Spellman College, where the graduation rate for African American women of African descent, next door to Morehouse, far above those rates you just mentioned. So I want to point out, so at Spellman, the graduation rate when I left, I don't know exactly what it is right now, was about 75%. And for those 25% who don't graduate, the primary reason they don't graduate is because they run out of money.
Yeah.
And there's not enough financial aid available for students. And I want to make that point because I think it is important to acknowledge that some institutions do a much better job educating students from first-gen students, students from underserved communities than others. And when I was talking to parents, I would say, you know, your daughter could go a lot of places, but find out what the graduation rate is before you send her. Because some places she's going to thrive, some places she's not. So I just want to say that we want to, of course, increase those rates for everyone, but I also want to acknowledge that some institutions are doing a much better job than others.
No, some are doing an amazing job. And for me, again, we don't incentivize that. We don't give them more resources to do that, and we don't take resources away from places where they don't really care.
Yeah.
Well said. And I think, you know, as we close this, part of what you're saying, Beverly, is that, you know, this scandal's been about access, but part of what this panel's revealed today is we don't have just an access problem, we have a completion problem. And I think if I could summarize much of this discussion today, when Michael said, we're getting what we're designed to get. We have a design problem in higher education. And a lot of the solutions you talk about are about redesigning the way our system works. So Beverly, Michael, Arne, thank you. This is an important topic. We're appreciative for your thoughts and insights. And I'd like to have a hand for our panel.
Thank you.